They opened the flower shop the next day. As Howl had pointed out, it couldn't have been simpler. Early every morning all they had to do was open the door with the knob purple down, go out and gather flowers. It soon became a routine for Sophie, Michael and the dogman. Then they took the flowers back to the shop and arranged them in a motley collection of jugs and buckets which Howl had dug out of the yard. Howl was nearly always missing while they gathered flowers, and the doorknob was always turned black down. He was usually back for a late breakfast, looking dreamy. If Sophie or Michael asked why Howl was always away at that time, he'd look injured. "If you want to talk to a school teacher, you have to catch her before school starts." The shop became very popular. People Sophie had known all her life came and bought flowers by the bundle. None of them recognised her, and that made her feel very odd. She became known as Aunt Jenkins. Howl took to spending long hours in the workshed across the yard. "I'm setting up defences against the witch," he said. "By the time I've finished, there'll be no way she can get into any part of this place." As for the others, Michael went off with bunches of spare flowers to see Martha all the time and was very cheerful. Calcifer was bored. Sophie brought him tasty-smelling leaves to burn, but Calcifer said what he really wanted was company. So Sophie made Michael serve in the shop for at least an hour every morning while she went and talked to Calcifer. More and more often he asked, "When are you going to break my contract with Howl?" Meanwhile Sophie had planted some roots, which became quite interesting. An onion had become a small palm tree and was sprouting little onion-scented nuts. Another root grew into a sort of pink sunflower. A third eventually opened into a pink flower with 4 petals, 2 pointing downwards and 2 that stuck out sideways. Sophie was staring at it when Howl came and stood behind her. "What is that thing?" Michael came to look. "It looks to me like a squashed baby flower." Howl shot Michael an alarmed look and slid the flower out of the pot into his hand, where he carefully uncovered the brown, forked root Sophie had grown it from. "I might have guessed. It's a mandrake root. Sophie strikes again." He went away looking rather pale. So that was almost all the curse come true, thought Sophie, as she went to arrange the fresh flowers in the shop window. That only left one more thing, the wind to advance an honest mind. After a while she went to talk to Calcifer. As she entered the room, the castle door clicked and opened. The doorknob was still set to black down, and they expected Howl to come through. They were astonished when the person who slid rather cautiously round the door turned out to be Miss Angorian. Miss Angorian was equally astonished. "Oh, I beg your pardon. I thought Mr. Jenkins might be here." "He's out," said Sophie, wondering where Howl had gone, if not to see Miss Angorian. Miss Angorian left the door swinging open on nothing and came in. "Please don't tell Mr. Jenkins I was here. To tell you the truth, I only encouraged him in hope of getting news of my fiancé, Ben Sullivan, you know. I'm positive Ben disappeared to the same place Mr. Jenkins keeps disappearing to, only Ben doesn't come back." "There's no Mr. Sullivan here," said Sophie. A sudden thought struck her. She can't mean Wizard Solomon, can she? Miss Angorian looked round and noticed Howl's guitar leaning in its corner. She dived round the chair and snatched it up. "Where did you get this? Ben had a guitar like this. It could be Ben's. May I take it to remind me of Ben?" "No," said Sophie, and jerked it out of her arms. "You've no right to walk into people's castles and take their guitars. I've told you Mr. Sullivan's not here. Now go back to wherever you came from." "Wales," said Miss Angorian. "Well, go back to Wales." And she used the guitar to push Miss Angorian backwards through the open door. Miss Angorian backed into the nothingness until half of her vanished. "You're hard," she said. "Yes, I am," said Sophie, and slammed the door. She turned the knob to orange down to prevent Miss Angorian coming back. Towards the end of the afternoon, Howl opened the shop door and sauntered in, whistling. He seemed to have got over the mandrake root. Sophie, knowing he hadn't gone to Wales after all, gave him her very fiercest glare. "Merciful heavens," said Howl. "What's the matter?" "What suit are you wearing?" she snarled. Howl held up one trailing sleeve and looked puzzled. It seemed black, but his shoulder and the top of his sleeve grew brown, then grey. The dogman pushed open the yard door and shambled in. Howl stared at it. "You've got an old English sheepdog now. 2 dogs are going to take a lot of feeding." "There's only one dog," said Sophie. "He's under a spell." Howl knelt down to look into what could be seen of the sheepdog's eyes. "What do you mean by not telling me about this? This dog's a man!" He yelled for Michael, who came running. "Did you know this dog was really a man?" asked Howl as he and Michael dragged the reluctant mountain of dog up the stairs. Michael was shocked. "He's not, is he?" Howl dragged the dog through the broom cupboard. The dogman tried to get away, but Howl got his shoulder under its chest and shoved, so that it went up onto its hind legs willy-nilly. Then he and Michael held it there. Calcifer surged to a deep, roaring blue. Sophie watched prudently from the door of the broom cupboard, saw the shaggy dog shape fade away inside the man shape. Finally, Howl and Michael were each holding the arm of a ginger-haired man in a crumpled brown suit. "Now," said Howl, "who are you, my friend?" I'm not sure." "The most recent name he answered to," said Calcifer, "was Percival." "Then we'll call you Percival for now," said Howl. "By the feel of you, the witch had you for some time." "Yes," said Percival. "She took my head off. I remember being on a shelf, looking at the rest of me." Michael was astonished. "But you'd be dead." "Not necessarily," said Howl. "You haven't got to that sort of witchcraft yet, but I could take any piece of you I wanted and leave the rest of you alive, if I went about it the right way." He turned to Percival. "Give it time. You'll remember. Now, why don't you go and help Sophie in the shop?" When they were alone, Sophie said, "You remember a great deal more than you let on. What did the witch really want with you?" "She wanted to find out about Howl," said Percival. "Howl?" said Sophie. "But you didn't know him, did you?" No, but I must have known something. You see, I'd never met Lettie, but I knew all about her, enough so that when the witch asked me, I said she kept a hat shop in Market Chipping. The witch went to the shop to teach us both a lesson, and you were there. She thought you were Lettie." "And," said Sophie, "she turned you into a dog straight after that." "Just outside the town," said Percival. "As soon as I'd let her know what she wanted, she opened the carriage door and said, 'Off you run. I'll call you when I need you.' And I ran.